Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Duck.
Paradise After Dark is a Tomahawk Media production covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and every now and then a little urban legend,
and strange places.
So be sure, folks, to visit our website, paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, and links to all of our social medias.
We also have a little bit of a tip jar there, so if you want to help out the show, you can swing by there, drop a couple coins in the tip jar, and we'll give you a shout-out. Speaking of shout-outs, I want to say thank you, Bobby, for joining us. She just signed up for our Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, is this a good time to go and tell everybody?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go ahead and explain ourselves.
Okay, let's get this out there. We have paused our Patreon, so we have 3 years of content on there, but for a couple months, even if you've signed up or you're currently a patron, you will be able to access Patreon of 3 years of content. And we have some of the Analyze This that we've done, vacation editions, plenty of off-topic uncuts. But we've suspended any future charges until we come back online and give you some ad-free episodes and some more content to add to that. We're kind of going through sort of a remodeling phase of the show, and we're hoping to come back hopefully in a month, maybe 6 weeks or so, come back, hot and heavy. We've got some exciting changes we're making. Obviously, we're about to explain about tonight's episode, something else we got involved in that we want to kind of focus more on, which gives us more of a purpose in the podcast. So feel free to, sign up Patreon. If you sign on, it's a one-time charge, and then you get all that content. And until we come back online, you won't be charged again. So, Bobby, thanks for joining us. And obviously to all of our existing patrons, feel free to go and listen to some old stuff. Ken's song is still on there. It's still on there.
Jack the Knife.
Yeah, it's still Mac the Knife.
I'm sorry, Mac the Knife.
So that was what's so funny is when I did that episode myself, I listened to it 1,000 times. Like, man, that sounds so good. And then I went back and listened to it when we reran it, and it was horrible. But either way, so Bobby, thank you for joining us, and obviously all of our friends that are our patrons. Hang in there. We're coming back, but we won't be picking your pocket until we come back with some fresh content. And
we will definitely be back by CrimeCon. We will be at CrimeCon in Orlando, September 22nd to the 24th. And if you haven't gotten your ticket yet, you better hurry up and use code Paradise for a special discount.
Yeah, Lauren just got back from CrimeCon UK. It was pretty exciting. So, there's so much stuff to do.
It was great. It was the first time we'd been at CrimeCon UK, and it was great. And I'm super looking forward to Orlando because we're a Florida podcast. CrimeCon's coming to Florida. It couldn't get any more perfect than this right now.
Yeah, we're going to be in our own backyard. It's going to be a wonderful thing.
So this episode is being created in conjunction with our new nonprofit organization, the Florida Themis Project. The Themis Project is highlighting and creating an awareness campaign for Heidi Zampell this month. And we're going to tell you Heidi's story in this episode. But first, if you'd like to help support the Florida Themis Project and hear all about us, read all about us, see what we're doing, check out the website, floridathemisproject.org. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. And we are also on all social medias. So if you look us up on the social medias, share what we post, that'd be super helpful as well.
Yeah, exactly. There's plenty of stuff out there. And if you want to help out the show, man, share the links, share the stories, put it out there for sure.
Yes.
So Lauren, tonight you said we're covering Heidi Zampell. This is kind of like some of our early days. Going back over 5 years when we were really talking about stories in our own backyard. And tonight, this is literally in our own backyard.
Yes. All right. 5 p.m. on June 18th, 1987, 22-year-old Heidi Zampell finished her shift at a store called Bath-Teak at the Coastland Mall in Naples, Florida. Heidi's friend, a man named James Helly, picked her up from work, and according to him, Heidi asked to be dropped off at a home in Golden Gate Estates. Now, back in 1987, Golden Gate Estates was a very rural and unpopulated area of Collier County. Reportedly, Heidi refused to explain her reasons for the visit to this remote home. But nonetheless, Helly drove Heidi to the address she asked to go, and when they arrived at the end of a long winding driveway, you could not even see the house from the road, she asked him to leave her there and not go up the driveway. Heidi hopped out of the car with just her makeup bag and seemed to vanish into thin air.
Okay, so Heidi was reported missing by her mother, Deborah, on June 23rd, 1987. This is about 5 days after her disappearance. At the time of her disappearance, Heidi did not live with her parents. She was living with a friend, Terry, who told police that on the day she went missing, Heidi told her she wouldn't be home that night. So they already knew that she wasn't coming home. But she had no idea where Heidi had gone or where she was currently at the time. But Heidi's parents knew something was very wrong when she didn't call or even come over the previous Sunday, which was Father's Day.
The first person police wanted to talk to was James Helly, the friend who dropped her off at the isolated home in Golden Gate Estates. Helly recounted his story. He picked Heidi up from work and she requested to be taken to this remote home. He brought her there. She got out and walked off after telling him she would call him tomorrow.
In the initial missing persons report, Deborah told the police that Heidi had been having some financial problems recently and owed a lot of people money. Strangely, though, the police report states that Heidi had just purchased a brand new car, which was a 1987 red Ford Mustang, which her friend James Helly was driving on the evening he picked her up. James Helly noted in the police interviews that Heidi owed him approximately $1,800. You would think that he'd have been upset that she had a new car, owed him money, but yet he was driving this new car that she had purchased.
So this isn't a fact, but sort of a rumor that she was allowing him to drive her car around. Her license was actually suspended at the time. She was allowing him to drive her car as sort of a payment to pay him back.
Okay, I was not aware of
now,
that.
That's not documented in any of the reports. That's just a rumor. So I don't know if that's really the case or not. But he was driving her car, and he continued to drive her car after she went missing.
Okay.
So the house Heidi wanted to visit was the Arthur Sims residence. Now, Sims was a minister at the Naples Independent Bible Church at the time. He lived there with his wife and his teenage son, who was about 18 at the time. Sims told investigators that Heidi was not a member of his church, did not know him or his family, and did not visit his residence that day.
But Arthur Sims had a teenage son who worked at the mall where Heidi worked. Investigators went to the mall to the store Moss Brothers, where Steve Sims, son of the minister, worked, to talk to him about Heidi. Of course, this is obviously standard procedure in the investigation. So they showed Steve a photo of Heidi, and Steve said she looked familiar, but that he didn't know her. Then he asked Steve if he knew James Helly, to which he said the name sounded familiar, but he didn't know him either. But on June 25th, after they spoke to Steve Sims, they got a call from one of Heidi's co-workers from Bath Teak, and she advised that Steve Sims had come into the store asking about Heidi. So this occurred after they had spoken to him, and Steve had claimed not to even know Heidi. So officers also noted in the report that they had never told Steve Sims where Heidi worked, or even that she worked at the same mall he did.
So how did he know that she worked at Bath Teak?
Exactly.
On Monday, July 27th, someone called the Collier County Sheriff's Office claiming to be Heidi. This person said that her mother had filed a missing person report, but that she was in fact not missing and wanted to let the sheriff's office know that she was okay. She did not want to be found by her mother. She stated she was currently living with her boyfriend and wanted to be left alone.
Well, that same day, another call came in from an individual claiming to be a friend of Heidi's. Now, this caller stated that she knew Heidi and had spoken to her that morning. He told her that she was planning on going on a permanent vacation. When pressed, the caller said that Heidi mentioned going to California, and the caller refused to identify herself and stated that she did not want any further involvement in this investigation. So these phone calls are coming in, but it's not really leading anywhere, but it's leading towards, hey, she just took off on her own.
Well, I think it's really worth noting these phone calls. The authenticity of neither of these calls could be verified. So they could have both been hoaxes, but what if they weren't? That means that someone knew where Heidi was and what she was planning.
Mm-hmm.
But who was the boyfriend that the first caller, claiming to be Heidi herself, mentioned? The only verified boyfriend of Heidi's was a man named Joe Swan, who was in the army at the time and stationed in Germany. Now, Heidi did have a passport at the time, but authorities had contacted U.S. Customs and discovered that they were unable to check by airline or boat manifests for people leaving the country, and there wasn't much they could do as far as tracing a passport, which I think nowadays kind of blows your mind. But again, this was 1987.
Yeah, it wasn't like you could just, type in Google.
And we should also state here that her bank cards and any of her identification, her social security number, has actually never been used again since she vanished. She's never used her social security card for a job. She's never opened a bank account, anything like that. So
yeah, and in these scenarios where there are never any other signs of the victim's information being used, the bank cards, social security numbers, it's always usually a bad sign.
Right.
It's never a good thing, especially a social security number, because regardless, you can change your name and things like that, but without a social security number, you can't just, maybe in 87 you could have just gone and gotten one, but it's always a bad sign. It's never a sign of someone who just took off on their own, didn't want to be found.
Right.
So what exactly here happened to Heidi in between the bottom of this driveway and the top of this long winding driveway? What happened?
That's what we're trying to find out. Detective Chuck Campbell of the Collier County Sheriff's Office told the Naples Daily News on July 30th, 1987 that, quote, "It's like someone said, 'Beam me up, Scotty,' and she's gone from the face of the earth." Campbell also told the newspaper that there was no evidence of foul play, but there was also no evidence to rule it out. He called every person in Heidi's address book, including the boyfriend who was in the army and stationed in Germany, but nobody had any idea where she might be.
Well, in August, over 2 months after Heidi vanished, her parents, Paul and Deborah Zampell, announced that they were offering a $1,000 reward for any information leading to the location of their daughter. Now, Deborah told the Naples Daily News, "We've heard all sorts of things, but we can't substantiate anything. This is our last-ditch effort."
In December of 1987, Detective Chuck Campbell wrote a supplemental report about Heidi's disappearance. In this report, he states that when Heidi first went missing, they decided not to enter her into the database of missing people that they used back then, something similar to what we have now, the NCIC, until they had more information. And she was finally entered in on June 26, 1987. He also stated that James Helly was not just a friend of Heidi's, but an ex-boyfriend. And Helly had been driving Heidi's car since she disappeared, until it was repossessed for non-payment on the car loan. Before the car was repossessed, investigators did search it, but nothing of very much significance was found. In the glove box, there was an ownership packet with Heidi Zampell's name on it, a brown key with the number 3 stamped on it, and 2 slips of paper, one with the name Patricia and a phone number, and another with the name Rob with a phone number. When the car was repossessed and detailed before resale, the auto dealer claimed that while detailing the car, nothing of significance was found. There were no stains or anything like that in the car.
Yeah, no hair, no fibers, nothing that leaned towards suspicion.
Right.
So Campbell stated that he had reached out to the Naples Police Department. Now, this is a separate agency from Collier County Sheriff's Office. Obviously, you have the city police and then the sheriff's office, which is the county. And he received a report from April of 1987 wherein Helly had been arrested for criminal mischief and battery. And Heidi Zampell was the victim in this incident. The report stated that Heidi stated she was not injured and refused to press charges and stated to the officer that she would, quote, solve the problem on her own. Now, when I read this, it kind of seemed to me like a Gabby Petito situation. That was kind of where I leaned and where my mind went when I read that.
Well, and this was back in 1987, and I actually looked up James Helly and his criminal record here in Collier County, and he has a very extensive criminal record for assault, battery. There was obviously at some point 1 or 2 restraining orders put against him, which he violated. several times over the years he was arrested for violating an order of protection. So he looks on paper to be sort of an abusive type guy toward the females in his life. If that makes sense.
Understand, which of course makes him, which is why, and we'll get into some of why the investigators kind of lean towards him in that direction.
A man named Robert Nagy, who worked at the Texaco station across the street from the mall, called Deborah, now this is Heidi's mom, and told her that he had seen Heidi in the few days before she went missing and claimed he saw her riding around in a silver Toyota, an approximately 1980 model. Nagy claimed to be just a casual acquaintance of Heidi and James Helly. If he was just a casual acquaintance, why would he call her mother and not the police?
Yeah.
When Detective Campbell went to ask Nagy about this, he had no further information. But Campbell discovered that Robert Nagy had contacted James Helly and told him that Campbell believed Helly to be a suspect in Heidi's disappearance. Campbell wrote in his report that he believed that Nagy and Helly were much closer than just, quote, casual acquaintances.
Well, and an investigator would have to make those notes, and he would have to put those, basically he can put two and two together.
Right.
That makes, that's a detective's job. Well, at the end of July, a former roommate of Heidi's named Abby was interviewed, and she revealed that Heidi did not have a good relationship with her mother, Deborah. Now, according to Abby, Heidi was adopted and had expressed a desire to find her birth mother, which obviously this caused some tension between her and Deborah. And Heidi often spoke of looking for her birth mother, whom she believed lived in Boston. Heidi also discussed finding some old friends in Michigan, and Abby had nothing of any more significance to add to the investigation, except that it seemed that when Heidi moved out and in with her friend Terry, her temperament was, quote, bad, and that she had began smoking marijuana and hanging out with a bad crowd. Now, these are all quotes from the police report, so we don't have any more details about, who she was hanging out with, exactly what she was doing, or what Abby meant by Heidi's, quote, bad temperament. So,
yeah, we don't know really the context of that, but that's what was written in the report.
Correct.
So on August 26, 1987, James Helly was arrested for stealing a pickup truck. After the arrest, Detective Campbell went to Helly's residence and spoke to his roommate, Darren Wagner. Wagner advised Campbell that on the day of Heidi's disappearance, Helly met him at a restaurant called Christopher's and he was driving Heidi's red Mustang. But at this point, the car was covered in mud and the bumper was dented. Wagner asked Helly about the car and Helly explained that it belonged to Heidi, but on the way to meet him that evening, he had run off the road, Immokalee Road, and had to have the car pulled out of a ditch. Now at the time, going back to 87 again, Immokalee Road was another very rural, very desolate road. Not exactly far away from where James Helly dropped Heidi off that night, but not super close either, not walking distance. And it's worth noting that Helly admitted to being on this road and going off the road in the car in the immediate aftermath of the last time Heidi was seen. Obviously, the car was still drivable after it was pulled out of the ditch or wherever it was. And the entire conversation at the restaurant was about the car, and Helly did not mention Heidi or her whereabouts.
Okay, so Lauren, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we're going to talk more about Heidi Zampell.
Okay, and we are back.
On September 3rd, 1987, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement crime team assisted in a search at Helly's residence. Now, a burn pit was discovered outside the home. This was labeled Scene A, and the home itself was labeled Scene B. The burn pit was photographed and documented in addition to utilizing archaeological techniques in the excavation of the site. Now, we do not know exactly what these archaeological techniques were, but we do know that the burn pit turned out to only contain trash and plant and tree material. The home was sprayed with luminol, and a section of the carpet was cut from the living room, and it revealed that they did kind of suspect blood there. Now, a few weeks later, FDLE lab determined that the blood was human, but there was not enough of it to make any kind of identification. So they couldn't determine if it was somebody who lived in the home. Because most people, if you live in a home...
So it wasn't like the carpet was soaked in blood.
Exactly. And most people who live in a home, your blood is probably somewhere in that home.
Yeah.
And obviously they couldn't identify this of who it was. There wasn't enough of it. So unfortunately, at this point, and this is the thing that anyone in the true crime world hates to hear, Heidi Zampell's case goes ice cold. So it went from top of the chart to there's nothing available, and ice cold it goes.
And it wasn't until December of 1993, so we're talking 5 years later, Detective Carlos Ortiz of the Collier County Sheriff's Office was assigned to follow up on Heidi's case. Detective Ortiz discovered that in 1989, James Helly changed his name to James Hannafin. Ortiz attempted to locate Helly Hannafin, but was unsuccessful until January of 1994 when he called a company called Hannafin Drywall in Naples. He called the business and asked to speak to James and was told by the woman who answered the phone that he was out on a job site. The woman who answered identified herself as James's mother. Further attempts to contact James Helly/Hannafin at that business were unsuccessful.
Detective Ortiz then located and spoke to Darren Wagner, Hannafin's old roommate. His story about the day Heidi disappeared hadn't changed at all. So then Detective Ortiz spoke to Joe Swan. This is Heidi's old Army boyfriend. And Swan's story hadn't changed either. He said that he and Heidi wrote letters almost daily while he was in Germany. Suddenly, the letters just stopped coming. And he recalled that at the time, before he knew she was missing, he assumed she had gotten back with her ex, James Helly, and was no longer interested in being with him. So he knew of James.
Maybe there was a bit of a love triangle happening there.
Well, unfortunately, it's a cold case, so all we can do is speculate.
Right, I'm just speculating. Detective Ortiz continued his quest to speak to James Hannafin. On January 19th of 1994, Ortiz found Hannafin's address in Naples, Florida, and knocked on the door. His wife, Caroline, answered the door and told Ortiz that James was at work. Caroline asked right off the bat if the visit was regarding Heidi Zampell, then mentioned that she hadn't met or started dating Hannafin until after Heidi had disappeared, and stated she only moved to Naples from California in 1988. It was later discovered that Caroline had been living in Naples for over 18 years at the time. Why would she lie about that?
Like a detective would not figure this out.
Right.
And again, we're not pointing fingers, but it's just an odd scenario.
It is. It's an odd scenario to note.
Yeah.
So Detective Ortiz received a call back from James Hannafin that afternoon, and Ortiz requested that they meet to go over the statements he had made about Heidi's disappearance to Detective Campbell back in 1987. Hannafin agreed to meet with Ortiz on January 27th at 3 p.m. at the sheriff's office, but he canceled that appointment the morning of. Hannafin requested that Detective Ortiz meet him at a job site that he was working on. Now, in this report, Detective Ortiz described Hannafin as agitated and defensive when asked about rescheduling their appointment. And Hannafin said that he had already been investigated and there was no evidence connecting him to Heidi's disappearance. Ortiz also noted in the report that Hannafin made no eye contact during their meeting and appeared to be evasive when speaking to him.
And, you know, a detective would not note that unless he felt it to be somewhat significant.
Right.
I mean, remember, detectives don't become detectives because they just get promoted to that point. I mean,
they have to know what they have to be good at what they do.
Exactly. Especially, and we've heard of Detective Ortiz before.
Yes.
He's a pretty seasoned veteran, even at this point in 1987 or 93, as we are right now. So Detective Ortiz had scheduled another time to meet at the sheriff's office. This is being February 2nd of 1994. They decided they were going to meet at 6 p.m. So Hannafin was supposed to call in at 5:30, which he never did, and Ortiz attempted to call Hannafin with no success, so he went to his home and rang the doorbell, and he knocked on the door. No one answered, but Hannafin's car was in the driveway, so Ortiz left his card in the door and left. That's all you can do at this point.
So he's actually evading or being very evasive. He's not wanting to talk to Detective Ortiz. That's becoming obvious.
And this being sad because remember, keep in mind, he was the last person to see Heidi Zampell.
Ortiz contacted Hannafin again on February 7th, and Hannafin was upset and felt he was being harassed. Ortiz tried to explain to him the need to go over his statements because he was the last person to see Heidi Zampell, and this case was still under investigation. That's pretty much exactly what you just said,
Exactly.
Ken. Hannafin requested to review his own statements from 1987 before he went over them with the investigators. And he also informed Detective Ortiz that he had spoken to some of the others that Ortiz had recently contacted, and he was aware of the information he had been gathering. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means. In the reports, I know Detective Ortiz had spoken to Joe Swan, the Army boyfriend. He spoke to Hannafin's former roommate.
Yeah, Darren.
So maybe I don't think Joe Swan would have contacted him, but maybe the former roommate said, hey, this detective is digging around in this case again.
And again, keep in mind that at this point, we can only speculate. But one of the questions that I have to ask when looking into this case, why would he have to look through the statements that he made previously?
Yes. Good question. That was my thought.
Why do you have to read through the statements? I mean, if someone who you knew, an ex-girlfriend, a girl whose car you were driving, that you knew well enough and cared enough for, respected enough to go pick up from work and take her somewhere and drive her around and just be involved with her, and she goes missing, why would you have to know what it was you told detectives happened?
It's like that old saying, tell the truth so you don't have to remember what you said.
Exactly. So, and that's one of the things that I kept going back to that, and I'm like, I don't understand. Why would you have to read that? Or the story doesn't have to change. If that's the story,
then that's the story.
That's the story. And, and I've listened to a lot of other podcasts and doing a lot of other investigations. Obviously, we've been doing this for a very long time. We've looked into so many cases that we haven't even produced. But you run into that sometimes where the story changes and changes and changes. If you're being investigated, write it down, folks. Little tip for you crooked people out there, write it down. That way you don't have to ask the investigators for the old paperwork.
Well, Hannafin agreed to reschedule the appointment, but stated he wouldn't do it at the sheriff's office. So on February 9th at approximately 3 p.m., Detective Ortiz met with Hannafin at his residence.
So Ortiz insisted that Hannafin show him again exactly where he dropped Heidi off. So Hannafin had no trouble finding the area or the home on 17th Street Southwest in Golden Gate Estates. So as they drove around, Hannafin pointed out, quote, a field with a barn that he had mentioned in his 1987 statement. But there did not look like a field there or like there was any barn or any remnants, like a concrete slab or anything there or any structure on the property in 1994.
So it wasn't like a open field or...
It was kind of nothing that was described.
Right.
If
okay.
you will.
All right.
So on the drive back, Detective Ortiz inquired if Hannafin had ever taken a polygraph, or if not, would he be willing to which Hannafin said no, he's never taken a polygraph, but yes, he would consider it. So unfortunately, at this point, Detective Ortiz had no further contact with James Hannafin after this particular day.
So nothing after that day.
That's it.
So Detective Ortiz also checked back in with the Sims family, who resided at the home where Heidi was supposedly dropped off on the night she disappeared. He was especially interested in the fact that Steve Sims, who was about 18 at the time that Heidi had gone missing, had gone to Heidi's work and inquired about her after telling authorities he didn't know her. Now remember, they never told Steve Sims where Heidi worked or even that she worked at the same mall. They only asked him if he knew her.
Very, very suspicious. It's almost like he was trying to duck and dodge. Like, yeah, I knew her, but I'm afraid to say anything because if I do, they're going to start looking at me.
Yeah.
I mean, do you kind of sense that a little bit?
I don't know what I sense. I'm just telling the facts.
Understand. Well, on February 17th of 1994, Detective Ortiz contacted Arthur Sims via telephone to inquire again about Heidi Zampell. Now, again, the elder Sims claimed he didn't know Heidi or James Helly or Hannafin or anyone in their family. He did state that Heidi was pretty, and she seemed like the type of girl that his son Steve may have been interested in. He stated that he would recall if a young girl had come to his house and that he wouldn't have allowed a girl anyway to come over or sleep over with his son.
Remember, he was a pastor.
Exactly. So obviously it's a whole different format. So Steve had joined the Army at this point and was stationed overseas. So his father did not have a contact phone number for him, but he did tell Detective Ortiz that he would try to find a number to contact him.
So Arthur Sims invited the detective to come look around his property. Ortiz noted a large depression in the ground about 15 feet by 30 feet in the rear of the property. Sims told Ortiz that trees were buried there along with some of the family pets. Ortiz asked Sims to look back through his records just to see if anything was off. Maybe he was on vacation or something, the day Heidi vanished. He might not have even been home. Maybe something could have happened at his home that he didn't know about.
Yeah, well, on February 18th at around 9:30 p.m., Detective Ortiz received a phone call at his home by dispatch with an urgent call from Arthur Sims. Now, Sims had reported to him that he was now extremely concerned because he found receipts reflecting the delivery of construction material for 2 slabs of concrete poured on his property shortly after Heidi disappeared. Some material was delivered on June 23rd of 1987, and this slab, was completed 3 days later.
On Monday, February 22nd, Detective Ortiz met with Arthur Sims at his home, and Sims produced the receipts showing the delivery of 54 and a half yards of concrete on June 26, 1987. 2 slabs were poured on that date. The larger slab was for a 2-car garage, and the smaller was for a patio behind the house. Prior to pouring the slabs, a crew worked a few hours a day for several days preparing the foundation. County compliance records showed the sites were inspected on June 24, 1987. Now, Mr. Sims said he did most of the work himself and did recall that the ground was loose. Ortiz asked if anyone from the sheriff's office inspected the sites before the concrete was poured, and the answer was no. Sims also constructed a small shed on the northeast side of the house where he kept his tools. The foregoing information is important because Mr. Sims also produced a copy of a check dated June 18, 1987, reflecting the purchase of audio equipment from a Radio Shack located at the Coastland Mall, where both Heidi and his son worked. Now remember, June 18, 1987 is the day that Heidi disappeared. So Arthur Sims told Detective Ortiz that it was possible he and his wife were out late that evening, possibly shopping at the mall. If that was the case, it was possible that Heidi had been at his home without his knowledge.
Well, and this is the kind of thing that detectives need. So I think Arthur Sims is giving some information to police saying, hey, I found these things. I'm giving you this information. This is what you want. And, you just want everybody in a case like this to do that, to get, hey, this is all the information that I have. This is possible. You asked me if I was home. I would never let a girl come and stay with my son at home. But hey, yes, I was out that night. It's possible she was here. So that's the kind of things that you want from someone that you're investigating.
And the report doesn't say if the detective asked the question, but if he wasn't asked and he just offered up that Heidi was pretty and seemed like the type of girl his son might have been interested in, I find that statement to be a little, I don't know how to say this without saying, it seems like Arthur Sims isn't covering for his son. If his son had anything to do whatsoever with it, which we don't know, but it seems like Arthur Sims is being straight up and straightforward with the detective, which is great.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Because it seems like most of the other people involved here are not being straight up and honest with this detective. And unfortunately, the only person is Arthur Sims, and he didn't really have that much to offer.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting was his statement about the ground being loose.
Right.
Which if, and obviously this is 1987, but anyone in Collier County that is having an inspection done, there's a thing called compaction.
Yes.
And it is a pain in the ass if you don't have it. So that being said, it's possible that maybe he noticed it, but never really thought of the ground, that being a problem. So it's just kind of tough that inspectors would come out. So you almost want to not, he may have just thought it was loose because the dirt on top was loose, but obviously it could have been anything at this point.
But we don't know if the ground was loose before or after the inspection.
True.
Something could have happened after the inspection, but before the slab was poured.
That's very true.
Because there was 2 days in between.
Very true. Well, unfortunately, we find ourselves in this situation where Detective Ortiz notes in his report that due to lack of evidence directing the investigation elsewhere, it is safe to assume that Heidi's disappearance is linked to the address where she was supposedly dropped off that night that she vanished. Remember, we only have this information because we were given this information by the main suspect that was probably investigated more than anybody else. So this is a scenario that you find that the only way we know that she was dropped off at this house is because we were told that's where she was dropped off.
Yeah.
We don't even know if that actually occurred.
That's true. That's very true.
Just something I want to put out there. So obviously that's kind of where we find ourselves right now is we can only go by the statements that we received early on in the investigation within a couple days of the 5 days she was reported missing. We find all the information and Hanafi says, hey, I dropped her off at this house. That's all we have to go with. So that's where the detectives kind of gone to this whole.
And I think we also need to note the fact that at some point that evening, the red Mustang got all muddy and got its bumper dented.
And was off the road.
So I just think that that's something that needs to be kept in mind.
Exactly. There's a lot of factors here. So the only reason that we have, Arthur Sims in this case and Stephen Sims in this case is because that's what we were told happened or where Heidi was last seen.
Right.
So with all this, the Detective Ortiz, he did attempt to contact Stephen Sims, but all means to contact him were unsuccessful. So he tried to reach out to Stephen Sims. Obviously, keep in mind, this is later on. His son had moved on to the military, so he was never able to really contact him or speak to him.
And that's pretty much the end of all the reports about the disappearance of Heidi Zampell. And as far as we can see, as far as what's been given to us from the Collier County Sheriff's Office, since Detective Ortiz investigated the case in 1993 and 1994, nothing has been done. This case has gone flat cold. There's not been anything in the newspaper. There's been nothing written about it. It's just thrown to the wind. But one of our objectives for our nonprofit, the Florida Themis Project, is to not let that happen, which
Correct.
is why we are highlighting this case for the month of June. We are doing this podcast. We're doing a public awareness campaign, a lot of social media, like we mentioned in the beginning. If you follow us on social, look up Florida Themis Project. There's a Facebook page. There's a Facebook group. There's an Instagram. Share, share, share. We don't want any case, any unsolved case, any missing person to ever be forgotten. So that's where we're at right now. Where is Heidi? Is she underneath this slab, underneath this 2-car garage? I mean, nowadays, there's so many things we could do. Even a cadaver dog may be able to sense her at this point. There's ground penetrating radar. If the point of the Themis Project, if we could raise the money to do things like that and maybe solve a case like this, solve Heidi's case. That's our point.
We want to find the missing.
Yes.
We want to help.
We want to bring closure to some of these unsolved cold cases, and we're asking for your help, even if it's just sharing on social media, You don't have to give money if you can't. If you can, we appreciate it so much. But again, if you want to learn more about the Florida Themis Project, please visit our website, floridathemisproject.org.
Well, Lauren, there's one thing that I want to mention, and this is what's very, very important here. This is the kind of thing that you really hate to hear in cases like this, and for a lot of reasons. One, because you never want to hear about someone being deceased at a young age. And one of the sad scenarios, and of course, we discussed him in this case, James Hannafin, James Helly. He passed away in 1999.
Right.
So one of the problems that you run into, and this is where we kind of need the public's help, and we want to put this out there, because if he saw Heidi for the last time, if he was involved in this, I feel like he's told somebody. If he wasn't, he's told somebody what he thought, what he felt. We want to know people that were within that community at that time that knew these people. What were your thoughts? What were your suspicions? Send us a message on Facebook or whatever. I mean, any way. You can email us. You can go to the website. You can, whatever.
We're very reachable.
Exactly. And the thing is because we want to know, what do you know? If we can get information from people who were around at that time, who might have known these people, maybe heard something, like I said, had a suspicion, heard a rumor, give us that information. We want to know. We want to give it to investigators. We want to help, but we don't know, because unfortunately in this particular situation, basically all the information that the last person to see Heidi alive, now he's gone and that information is gone with him, unless he's let somebody know about that. So if you know anything, please, like Lauren said, contact us in any way, shape, or form. Contact the Themis Project. The people over there can help. Just someone's
Contact
missing.
the sheriff's office.
Someone's been missing. And, when we got into this podcast thing, that was one of the things that we really wanted to do, was help. And that's what we're here right now trying to do. So please, like Lauren said, contact Collier County Sheriff's Office. Anything you can do is greatly appreciated.
If you have any information about Heidi Zampell, please call the Collier County Sheriff's Office at area code 239-252-9300. That's 239-252-9300.
So, everyone, that's going to be it for tonight.
Again, if you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe to our Patreon, even though it's on hold right now, at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media. You can also support the Themis Project at floridathemisproject.org.
Yeah, follow the social medias too. I mean, if something comes up, share. People don't realize how much that actually helps, because you get the faces out there, you get the cases out there. Someone out there knows something about every single case. Just about, I've seen it so much. So please do that.
And check out our website for links to all of our social medias, Patreon, merch store, and more. And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening, and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, everyone, thank you so much for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark.